Now, why is it that most people that start a diet cannot stick to it? And why is it that those who lose the weight regain it back and then some? Our bodies tend to resist when you start restricting food and calories and going on a low carb diet. Most diets out there do involve lessening of the calories. I don't know of any diet that increases your calories. But when I was in practice, I would always ask a person who has difficulty losing weight, what happened in your history? When did it start? And this is what they told me over and over and over again. They would start a diet, lose the weight, gain it back, and one for one, those people who did the most diets have the most difficult time losing weight. In other words, the more diets that they do, the slower the metabolism, or they might have this apparency of a slow metabolism. And I've never had an overweight person tell me that they can lose weight easily. They just need to do the right things. The great majority of the time that they don't attempt to lose weight is because it's very difficult. They don't see results. That's where the problem is. So, is it actually true that diets slow your metabolism? Well, this is a very interesting topic because when you restrict energy from the body in calories and you lose fat, the body will compensate and the metabolism becomes more efficient. What does this word efficient mean? It can run on smaller amounts of fuel, just like a car. You have different cars that are of a different efficiency. Those cars that can take the same amount of fuel and go longer are more efficient. They're not gas guzzlers. Well, in the body, it's the same thing. If you have a difficult time losing weight because you've dieted for many, many years, your body is probably compensated for survival purposes because dieting is similar to famine or a little bit like starvation. And I'm mainly talking about the lowering of calories. But what's really going on, if we want to isolate the real problem, a person that is struggling with weight loss doesn't really have a slow metabolism. They have an enhanced metabolic efficiency problem. They don't waste energy very easily. They can run just on a little bit of energy. So, is this really a bad thing? Well, yeah, it's kind of a bad thing from the person's perspective, but from a survival standpoint, it's really an enhanced survival capacity. Those people that have a slower metabolism have more survival long term. And it's interesting to me how so many people are, pushing, wow, you have to lose weight, you have to lose weight. This is just a side note, and I don't want to get into this, but it's really interesting. Those people that are overweight actually, believe it or not, might not be as unhealthy as you might think. Now, I'm not talking about the person eating a lot of junk food. I'm talking about those people that eat healthily and they still are overweight. If we compare those to a skinny person who eats poorly, that skinny person has less of a survival capacity. So many times people don't change their diet because they say, I don't have a weight problem. So we always associate weight with being unhealthy. We don't associate being overweight with a very efficient metabolism. So that's the topic for today. I want to talk about it. I want to do a deep dive into this because if you end up solving the wrong problem, a slow metabolism, with things that maybe might stimulate your metabolism, you might end up burning your metabolism out. But I think for the majority of the population, it's not a slow metabolism, it's just a very efficient metabolism. So I want to focus on the calorie restriction. I want to talk about that. There's a lot of data on calorie restriction, but I'm going to give you a little summary on what it talks about. People that restrict the calories are more susceptible to being deficient in nutrients, which can then affect the hormone system. I mean, just let's take one example. The Biggest Loser. Years ago, they had the show, The Biggest Loser, and these people very, very dramatically lost a ton of weight, and they had to do some serious calorie restriction and exercise. Well, we know now the bad effects that that created. Every single one of these people gained the weight back and more, but those people who lost the most weight had the slowest metabolism. So it kind of screws everything up. It's like it just makes it really hard to lose weight from then on out. Another term for this is called adaptive thermogenesis, where your body is adjusted or adapted to these lower amounts of calories, and now it just burns fat less because it's more efficient. Now, there was another interesting experiment called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. Okay. I'm going to put the link down below for that as well. But this experiment involved a group of men going on a very low calorie diet. So they had 32 normal men, went 24 weeks on a semi starvation diet, and then 12 weeks on a restricted refeeding diet. And then 8 weeks, they can pretty much eat on anything they want. And the results were similar to the experiments on mice, where you're forcing the machine to conserve energy as it's trying to deal with this starvation. And they found that the metabolism was suppressed by like 15.5%. But they had rebound hunger, they regained the weight quickly, and some had a higher level of weight gain than others beyond the original starting weight. So, now what about intermittent fasting? Okay, how does that compare with calorie restriction? Well, when you lower calories, the person usually is more hungry and they have more cravings. When you do intermittent fasting correctly, you're less hungry and you don't have the cravings. And when we're talking about intermittent fasting, I mean, the problem is there's so many different types of intermittent fasting. But the bottom line is that if you do intermittent fasting without restricting the calories, you're going on a period where you're eating nothing for a while versus just going on a period where you're eating lower amounts of calories. And there's some very unique benefits to just doing intermittent fasting and not doing calorie restrictive type programs. So, out of the 27 trials that I looked at, 18 were randomized controlled trials. And pretty much in all the studies, they all lose weight. There were no serious adverse events. Most of the weight which was lost was actual fat loss. Most of the people lost weight in the midsection. Five of the studies, which included not just obesity, but also diabetes, had improvements in blood sugars. Now, I will say that some of the studies involving calorie restriction did not show negative effects. Okay. Because again, there's variables with that as well. And I think it has to do with what type of calories you're consuming and if you have enough nutrients with those calories. Because when we talk about calorie restriction, it doesn't necessarily define the quality of those calories, which make sense from pure logic. Is that if you're consuming less nutrients, you're going to create more negative effects with, you know, health and body function. But what if you did calorie restriction with all the nutrients? Okay, I'd like to see that study. It probably show a lot better results. But regarding intermittent fasting, okay, periods of time where you're not eating and then you're eating, I always recommend with that doing the healthy version of the ketogenic diet. So we don't create imbalances in the body because one of the problems with calorie restrictive diets, as well as intermittent fasting, is are you getting enough requirements in your fatty acids or your amino acids? If you are, you're going to have a lot less problems. But here's the big thing about intermittent fasting that's different than calorie restrictive diets. And I'm speaking in a generality. When you do intermittent fasting, you adapt your body to running on ketones, which is basically a situation where you're burning your own fat. So even though you might be indirectly reducing the amount of calories by eating less the meals because you're going from 3 meals to 2 meals or even 1 meal, it's hard to eat all those calories in 1 meal. What you have to realize is a portion of that fuel that you get in those dietary calories is not coming from the diet. A portion of that fuel is coming from the person's own fat fuel. Whereas if you do calorie restriction without going on low carb, that could easily be a situation where you're not able to tap into your own fat. You're tapping into your own muscle because your carbs are too high and your insulin's too high. In the presence of insulin, you can't tap into the fat. So if you were to do a low calorie diet, I would highly recommend you go low carb. You have to also look at how much of your own fat is being mobilized. And just so you know, are nutrients in your own fat that are stored that then are released, like even vitamin D. Anything fat soluble, like the fat soluble vitamins, can be released into the system to provide for more nutrition, as well as energy fuel. But I don't even look at the combination of the healthy version of the ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting as a diet because you can easily do this as a long term lifestyle change where it doesn't even feel like a diet. There's a lot of flexibility with the types of food that you're eating. But the main thing is you're not hungry going into it. You don't crave anything, which makes it very sustainable. And it even helps your sympathetic nervous system. So you have less stress. And another big thing that it will help you with is there's something called a set point, which is kind of a very comfortable weight that your body tends to settle in that you can't seem to go below. It likes to gravitate into that range. So let's say, for example, it's, I don't know, 170 or 165 or 180, whatever, right? That's where you're at. And you just can't seem to get below it. You might lose weight, but you always kind of hit this plateau, they call it. There's some interesting data that relates to the amount of insulin that you have in your bloodstream and that set point. So, this relates to something called insulin resistance. So, if you have insulin resistance, chances are you have greater amounts of fasting insulin. Insulin is a fat storing hormone. And if you have diabetes, for example, or some people that are overweight that aren't eating healthily, they usually have a higher fasting insulin, right? Which is rarely tested. That could be the thing that is controlling your set point and not allowing you to go lower. And I think the set point does relate to this very efficient metabolism adaptation problem. And when you're in ketosis, by the way, initially at least, your body wastes a lot of fuel. You're peeing out ketones, you're breathing out ketones. Those are chunks of fat. Your body is wasting, it's less efficient with the fuel. And also in the little mitochondria, the factories that make energy, you're producing more energy from those ketones. I also want to mention this other new diet out there. It's called the metabolic confusion diet. What is that? It's not necessarily a calorie restrictive diet as much as you're going on a low calorie diet. You are lowering your calories to a certain degree, maybe 1700, but usually it's not really, really low. Maybe it might go down to 1200, but you're doing that for a few days. Okay. And then you're actually increasing the calories higher. So you might be on like 4 days of 1700 calories, right? And then you go on 3 days of 2700 calories. That's called the metabolic confusion diet. Now, what's interesting about that diet, and just from the research that I saw, there's doesn't seem to be the same bad effects as a low calorie diet. It doesn't seem to slow down your metabolism. And people like it because it's more flexible, it's not as restrictive. So some people kind of do this for the whole week. They go on a little lower calorie, but then on the weekends, they kind of do what they want. Now, for some people, that may work. I mean, it's a step up. And if you're starting out and you look at the ketogenic diet and this intermittent fasting as being very difficult and you can't do it, why don't you try the metabolic confusion diet? And it's not intermittent fasting, but the problem is that there's not a lot of long term data to know if it does eventually cause your metabolism to be downgraded. But at the very least, I think it's not restricting nutrients. You won't end up with a nutrient deficiency and it's probably enough calories where it doesn't send signals to your brain to slow down the metabolism. And maybe you do that for a while and to the point where you can graduate into the healthy version of the ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting, or even one of those two. And the big thing I want you to get out of this video is that it's not that you have a slow metabolism, you have an enhanced metabolic efficiency. And once you get the right problem, then you can come up with the right solution. So if you really want the what I think is the best solution for this, I would recommend learning how to do the basic keto plan from this video right here. Check it out.